Hello, and welcome to the Feeling Good podcast, where you can learn powerful techniques to change the way you feel. I am your host, Dr. Rhonda Borowski, and joining me here in the Murrieta studio is Dr. David Burns. Dr. Burns is a pioneer in the development of cognitive behavioral therapy and the creator of the new team therapy. He is the author of Feeling Good, which has sold over 5 million copies in the United States and has been translated into over 30 languages. His latest book, Feeling Great, contains powerful new techniques that make rapid recovery possible for many people struggling with depression and anxiety. Dr. Burns is currently an emeritus adjunct professor of clinical psychiatry at Stanford University School of Medicine.
Hello, Rhonda.
Hello, David.
Hello, Matt.
Hello, David. Hello, Rhonda.
Hello, Matt. And welcome, everyone, all of our listeners around the country and across the world. This is the Feeling Good podcast, episode 333. And if you hear Matt May, you may jump to the conclusion that we're doing another Ask David episode.
Great to be back with you both. Glad to be here.
And let me start by reading a very lovely endorsement from Rob, who wrote, "Dear Dr. Burns, I am a longtime listener and reader, but a first-time caller or emailer. I stumbled upon this endorsement for Feeling Good today, and I thought it was worth sharing with you. I can't think of a better endorsement for a book. I hope you enjoy it." The quote is, "I've replaced my copy of Feeling Good close to 10 times as I keep lending it to friends who never give it back." And this is a blog that we'd love to refer people to called, and the blog address is girlboss.com, girlboss.com/blogs/read/Feeling Good David Burns Review. And Rob wrote, "Have a great day. Please give full credit to the Girl Boss blog for the actual endorsement, which I just did." And he's so funny. So many people write this. He wrote, "Hello, Rhonda and team. Thanks for all you do, David and the team. I find your work very helpful, and I'm grateful to all for all that you do." Rob,
and then there's this link I'll put in the show notes so people can go and see this unusual endorsement for Feeling Good. I don't have it in front of me right now, but I said this is the cheapest, cheesiest book you've ever seen that will absolutely change your life, or something like that.
Yeah.
It was really cute.
Yeah.
So thank you, Rob, for that kind email. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, again, let's dive into our first question. And the first question that somebody wrote to you, David, is, when you talk about someone recovering, is that free of panic attacks and anxiety forever, or a great decrease in symptoms, but you'll always be an anxious person to a certain extent, especially for someone who has fundamentally been anxious since they were very young and not so episodic, but continuous?" Which we sort of...
I'll let you folks take first shot at it. I think it's a terrific question.
Matt?
Yeah, I can answer this maybe in part. So when people recover, I'm always shooting for the complete recovery, meaning elimination of panic and anxious symptoms and or whatever else they've got, like depression or what have you. And that complete recovery, though, it's not something that sticks around forever. I don't think anything does. The Buddhists were correct, I believe, when they said we all drift in and out of enlightenment. And in fact, it's a bit dangerous to imagine if you're real successful in therapy that, okay, I'm good forever. I never have to do any work to maintain my mental health, because then the relapses are more surprising when they do occur, and may lead you to believe wrongly that the therapy didn't help you and you're just a hopeless case, and that there's no point in repeating the process that was actually effective and cause the initial complete recovery. The reality is that you kind of have to keep the pressure on anxiety, that if you recover from a phobia or something, you've got to continue to do some exposure in order to maintain those gains. And if you have a significant relapse, you have to go back to the methods and go from scratch. But if you do that, despite the hopeless feelings you have, then you will experience that recovery. And if you don't, go back to that therapist who helped you in the first place so they can give you a tune-up. That would be part of my answer to the question.
Cool. By the way, what's the date that this is going to be published, Rhonda?
February 27.
Okay. Well, I think that's too late. That's after the workshop I'm doing with Jill, I think on February 5th, if I have the date right. But what I was going to say is we're going to show a video of an actual severe relapse. I think it's the first time an actual relapse has been captured on video.
Oh, fantastic.
And it's something you might have seen. It's in the Melanie session where she had intense anxiety and shame, and she was afraid she was going to be found out. And she made a miraculous recovery right toward the beginning of the session. It was a 2-hour session from start to end, but she had this mind-boggling recovery, and she was just on top of the world. And then we came across a thought that she hadn't crushed yet, that she'd overlooked, and she burst into tears and started sobbing and fell right back into the same intense level of relapse, of intense anxiety and shame. She was afraid that her students or patients would find out that she'd had 2 broken marriages, and she was just pretty sure that everyone would judge her, and that awful things would happen. And so we just went back to the same steps that we'd gone through at the beginning of the session, but we did them in pretty rapid form, and took about 10 minutes, and she suddenly had her second recovery right within the session. And It was amazing. But it's just like what you're saying, Matt, that we tend to drift in and out of enlightenment. And once you've overcome a fear, you want to keep after that fear so it doesn't come creeping back. Like I at one point had intense fear of public speaking, also microphones, performance anxiety. And my first talk academically was the worst nightmare. I imagined it horrible, and it turned out to be exactly as horrible, even worse than what I had imagined. But now I do public speaking all the time. I'm doing it right now, and I keep after it, so it doesn't have much of a chance of taking over. But if I stop public speaking and then suddenly had to do some public speaking in a threatening venue, I might experience that fear again.
We recently interviewed Irving Kirsch, and he talked about expectancy theory, that when you expect something positive to happen, then it's more likely that positive things will happen. And I think if somebody that's why we talked to him on that podcast about dangling the carrot, and how important it is for the therapist to provide that sort of positive expectation to the client that therapy could work for them, and that we have tools that are great that will help them. And so if somebody has reached a place where they're fully recovered, and we don't do and then we do relapse prevention, then we're sort of helping them with the anticipation, the expectation. Like if they're fully recovered, and then we say, okay, bye, see ya, you'll never need to come back again. And then, as you described before about the natural part of the human brain, that when something comes up again in their life because of a life event, and they start feeling anxious again, maybe they might feel even worse, like, oh, the therapy didn't work, or oh, nothing will ever help me, and move more into that place of more hopelessness. So, when you talk about recovering, immediately free of all the symptoms, it's so important to continue to give them the idea that they can anticipate something happening in the future, and how to handle that by using the tools that already worked in therapy, or by coming back for a quick tune-up. But I think it's really important to as you've just talked about even in the last podcast, provide them with that information and how to overcome it.
Yeah, I never had a patient, I don't think, that I well, none that I can remember, that I didn't do relapse prevention training at the end of therapy. It was the last piece of the treatment. And if you don't do it, you're, as the Buddha so often said, you're screwed.
Yeah.
But if you do it, then you're in good shape, because you give the patient the idea you are going to relapse, and here's what to do when it comes. Here's the tools that are going to work for you, and they work for you this first time, and they'll always work for you. And then they have that mindset that all human beings relapse. That's what it means to be a human being, that you're not happy all the time. And we run into especially if you have a full life, we run into conflicts, we run into danger, we run into setbacks. Life has many opportunities for joy and for unhappiness. And if you accept that and have the tools to deal with those bumps in the road, then you're in good shape.
I love what you're saying there. I when doing relapse prevention for anxiety, at least I've noticed that there's quite a paradox to it, which is the idea is to not try to avoid relapse, but try to have relapse, and try to go into see if I can have a relapse. And then when you realize, oh no, I can't, I have actually defeated my anxious thoughts, then you've achieved a kind of higher level of recovery. And maybe that's what Melanie experienced in that work that you did with her.
Yeah, except it wasn't intentional. It just came on.
Oh, it just came on. Yeah.
Yeah, because we had been doing externalization of voices, and then there was one thought that she had about 18 negative thoughts, and so there were several we hadn't dealt with, but there was one that was particularly vulnerable. And then Angela Crum confronted her with that using a kind of feared fantasy thing, and so she tried to. She looked like she'd been skewered.
Oh,
and just began sobbing. It was very moving and dramatic, and equally moving and inspiring is how, when we just went through the same steps, the positive reframing and the same techniques that had helped her just 20 minutes earlier, suddenly she popped out of it for the second time within the session and got back onto that super high. It was amazing to behold and to have it on video. And now she's been, that was 10 years ago, and she, I talked to her fairly recently, and she's still doing great. It was really a life transforming experience for her.
It's wonderful. I had one other thought when you were talking about some non-existent, permanently happy state. My sense is that if we had a button that we could press and achieve that wouldn't be a good idea at all. I don't think I would prescribe that to any of my patients or to myself, because that would rob me of the experience, the ability to feel appropriate sadness or appropriate anger, etc.
Yeah. I don't think there's anybody who gets into some state of, I've arrived, I'm special, I'm happy, I'm going to be joyous forever. It's not what it means to be a human being, and as you point out, it wouldn't even be desirable.
Right. When you hear your best friend has cancer or something, and you can't stop giggling about it, that would just be so bizarre, absent of your humanity.
Yeah. Although I might say that you and I, we treated our dear late friend Marilyn, and who had just gotten cancer, and we did giggle.
It was good to get to those both the tears and the laughter.
Yeah. I still talk to her every day when I go out, and I talk to Obi too. When I'm out doing my walking, have a little conversation with them.
That's good. That's the sadness of celebration connection.
Yeah. I just say hi, Obi. Hi, Marilyn. Hope you're doing well, type of thing. I love you. It's just pretty simple.
I love that.
Yeah. And then I look around to see if one has come back in the form of a bird or something like that. Or I think I'm going to look up in a tree and see Obi sitting there on a branch or something.
What a great experience. Okay, here's another question. What if your client or patient understands the cognitive distortions but doesn't believe them to be true?
I'll let you guys take first shot again.
Matt?
So one interpretation of the question might be that it is possible to have an intellectual understanding that a negative thought is distorted and untrue, but not feel it at a gut level as a result of some kind of resistance or desire to maintain a belief in that thought. So that could be part of what's going on. And another,
what would be an example of that? Like say a perfectionistic student who is beating up on themselves and saying I'm a loser because I missed a question on that test, and they're into all or nothing thinking, but they're determined not to not give up their all or nothing thinking because they think their perfectionism is helping them. So I love what you've said so far, Matt, that it's not only, and that's what we've seen in team therapy, it's not only a matter of seeing the distortions in your thought, it's also an issue of do you have the motivation to crush that thought and to feel happy, and the answer is all of us have a lot of resistance within us to change. And you have to, a skillful therapist has to know how to deal with that if you really want to have a high percentage recovery rate with your patients. So that's one part of the answer. Give us some more, Matt.
Yeah, I'm thinking of some other examples where folks were really, and this may just be the same answer, but where folks would see a should statement like, that person shouldn't have done what they did, right? And it was just wrong.
Yeah, and they're a loser.
And they're a loser, right?
Yeah.
And that they can, and then they might think, well, shoulds aren't really distorted. People really shouldn't do that sort of thing. And
they really are a loser. It may be labeling and all or nothing thinking and overgeneralization, but it's really true that's a bad person, and I'm going to enjoy my moral superiority of judging them and looking down on them.
Yeah, that's why I think it's still connected to the motivational model, that there's something in it for them to maintain the belief in the thought, even though they see that it's distorted at some level.
Yeah.
So maybe
go ahead.
I'm sorry. So maybe you're saying, Matt, that maybe this is something they really don't want to work on. Maybe they really don't want to give up these thoughts. And maybe that's, when we talk about techniques not working, David talks about falling back to empathy and working through the resistance again.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's right on, Rhonda. Right.
And then another thing that people sometimes say that's also kind of hogwashy, although Matt wouldn't say that, only David would say that, is that they say, well, I can see that my negative thought isn't true, but I still feel upset. And that statement is never valid. Like, and an example of it would be, let's say someone has a phobia of riding in a glass elevator, and they say, I can rationally see that glass elevators are safe because people go up and down, all the time in them, and you don't read about horrible things in the newspapers happening to people who ride in glass elevators. And so, although I know that glass elevators are safe, it still doesn't help me with my anxiety. Well, that's a good example of why we need so many models in dealing with anxiety, including the exposure model, because if you use the exposure model, which you need, and then you get on that glass elevator and say, now how scared are they? They say 100% and say, how much do you believe that this elevator is dangerous? They'll say 100%, I want out of here. You see? So they really do still believe that negative thought when they're confronting the thing that they're so so afraid of. And that's why we have to have a lot of different models for treating anxiety or anything. And the cognitive model is one of the four, and it can be very surprisingly helpful for all kinds of anxiety, but it's often not the complete solution. That's why we need these other things other than just dealing with cognitive distortions. We need exposure, we need the motivational model, we need the hidden emotion model. There's a lot of powerful tools to treat anxiety or anything. And if you just focus on one tools like cognitive distortions, you'll have some success, because people love working with cognitive distortions, but they're not the answer to every problem that every patient has.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll give a brief plug for the distortions. I think it's really useful to know what distortions are in a thought that you're trying to defeat, because it'll give you good ideas for what other methods to bring in. Mm-hmm. But I think it's fairly uncommon for someone to make complete recovery just using that, just identifying the distortions.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I kind of think of it as a ladder or building blocks, and the distortion is the beginning of going up the ladder.
Yeah, that's a good way of thinking about it.
Okay, here's the next one. Has research been done on the possible relationship in hormone levels in women and anxiety or depression, especially during pregnancy or post-pregnancy, or those women going through menopause? And also, can negative thoughts depend on the person's nutrition so that vitamins that are lacking can lead to depression?
I'll give you guys first shot again.
Well, I'm not a medical doctor. I recently had a couple of experiences with patients who had a lot of depressive symptoms, and then they went to their medical doctor and got on hormone replacement therapy. And a lot of their symptoms, not all of them, but a lot of the physical symptoms were definitely reduced.
Yeah, that's what Irving Kirsch was telling us about the other day, the power of the placebo effect. Mm-hmm. But I do know that used to be done a lot, and I think if someone is going through menopause or needs hormone replacement, I'm sure the hormone replacement can be real mood uplifting, because your symptoms and all the thoughts associated with them are reduced and improved.
Yeah, I had this strange experience once where I was just driving somewhere, and I realized that I started to go into a depression. I started to feel kind of hopeless and defeated, and started to think what a loser I was and how I should be better. And then I realized, oh my God, I'm famished. I haven't had lunch. And I think sometimes what happens is that our negative thoughts are the actual cause of our negative feelings, but we might be more prone to them, or they might seem more realistic, or we might not be as good at defeating them if our physical, the fuel we're running on isn't quite right. But I don't know. That's just a theory too.
Yeah, that's a cool one. I've had that experience myself. Yeah, used to be when I was in private practice, and toward the dinner time, I'd start feeling kind of low on energy and exhausted and feeling a little down. Yeah, and then go out and have a meal, and all of a sudden, hey, I'm on top of the world again. So that's a good point. I'm not aware, though, and you might be, Matt. I've seen studies trying to correlate hormone levels and with women's periods and feelings of irritability and all kinds of things like that. People have been looking at that type of thing forever, and I haven't looked at the literature lately, but last time I looked at the literature, I wasn't aware of anything that's ever been proven there in terms of some hormone that is going up and down, that's having predictable, consistent causal effects on depression or any other negative emotion. But I may be all wet on that.
Yeah, there's a lot of research out on it, and I'm not an expert on it. I did a rotation at the Women's Wellness Center at Stanford, and they're doing a lot of really active research to try to understand these relationships between hormone levels and anxiety and depression. My understanding, there's a statistic that something like 85% of women after childbirth will develop some version of depression, the baby blues. And sometimes it can be more severe, and it's thought to have some connection to withdrawal from high levels of hormones that were present in the pregnancy. And I also had the experience of treating someone who was profoundly and suicidally depressed after pregnancy, and comparing the results of Team CBT to she was also getting ECT and the
electroconvulsive therapy.
Really, she was?
Yeah, she
Wow.
was. She had been quite suicidal, and they didn't know exactly what to do. But the results of the Team CBT were that it was as effective as the ECT.
I hope
so. I was really glad to see that. We would see radical reduction in her negative moods after after a session, and the improvements continued over time as we continued the therapy.
That's neat. I think there's a tendency for some people to want to biologize things and see the causes and cures of things of being of a biological nature, vitamins or diet or hormones or something like that. But I've had my best luck when working with the team model and asking people what they're thinking. And I think Tyann Strong, am I pronouncing her name right, Rhonda?
Yes.
From Oklahoma, specializes in postpartum depression using Team CBT, helping the women with their negative thoughts, and she's had amazing success with that treatment. I think in the first chapter of my book, Feeling Great, I talk about maybe the second chapter, I'm not sure, but I talk about a woman who had just had a baby who was very, very depressed. But then when I went through what are your negative thoughts, she was having trouble with breastfeeding, and for the child couldn't latch onto her nipples quite correctly. And so she was beating up on herself and telling herself she was a failure as a mother because she couldn't breastfeed her baby properly. And she was also feeling that she wasn't as loving toward her child as she wanted to be. And she was saying a mother should feel loving all the time, should be, and in fact she had a career that she had been very reluctant to let go of because she loved her career, and now all of a sudden she was on leave of absence, and she was missing her colleagues, and she was missing her work, and telling herself, I shouldn't be missing my colleagues, I shouldn't be missing my work, I should be totally devoted to this child. And the thing at the root of her depression was not some hormonal problem, or it was just perfectionism, and she was very lovely person to work with and very, very motivated. And we were able to turn it around, I'm pretty sure, in just one session. And then she continued to do well, and eventually had a second child. And was very happy, about that, and had gotten tremendous promotions at work as well. And so the story had a beautiful, happy ending. But if I'd been resorting on hormones and vitamins and, pills and things like that, I don't think the treatment would have been very effective. But what shocks me is what a huge percentage of therapists and the human race think that you can deal with human problems without asking people about their thoughts and what are you thinking, what are you telling yourself. And when you do that, you see exactly what's going on. And if you have some of these Team CBT skills that are directed both at motivation and at distorted cognitions, you have incredible power to cause, in many people, almost immediate profound changes in how people are thinking and feeling, and see that despair being transformed into joy. And for me, that's one of the greatest experiences of my life. And it's such a pleasure to be able to make that happen frequently. And I know that you two have had those kinds of experiences as well.
Many times, David, and I so appreciate what you're saying. If we just go trying to give vitamins or hormones or pills to people while ignoring the most obvious cause of our feelings, our negative, distorted thoughts, we're really barking up the wrong tree, or at least it's an inadequate, incomplete approach.
By the way, it occurs to me that our last Ask David or episode was all on anxiety questions, and these are all on anxiety questions, and I finally figured out why.
Good. I was wondering why.
Because remember, this was a PESI talk I gave, and we got hundreds of questions. I think there were 8,000 people or something at the talk, and we didn't have time to answer but a few of them. Mm-hmm. And so these were questions on anxiety because it was a talk on anxiety. But it's not a bad thing to have an Ask David, a couple of them on a theme like this on anxiety. And I might say to all of you listeners, there's a lot more questions here that we won't get a chance to answer all of them, but there's another 10 or 20 of them at least. But I gave answers to all of them, so they'll be in the show notes, even ones that we won't have time to talk about on the show. So you might want to get the show notes and read through them if you're interested in answers to questions about anxiety and so-called anxiety disorders and treatment.
Mm-hmm. David, you mentioned that people are they like to biologize their problems. Yeah. And it does seem like it would be so much easier. And then in our last podcast, Matt, you talked about how people need to stay on top of their physical health by the healthy patterns as well as their mental health. And I think in both situations, like it would be a lot of people are attracted to the idea, if I could just take a pill, then I could lose weight and I'd never have to worry about what I eat and I'd never have to worry about exercising. And if I take this pill, the hope is I'd never have to worry about feeling anxious or feeling depressed. I could just continue. And that's such a myth on both levels.
Yeah, well, there are pills. There are magic pills that will make your anxiety disappear totally and almost instantly. They're called Xanax and Valium and Librium, and all the benzodiazepines are magic bullets. The problem is the effect doesn't last long, and if you keep taking them regularly for more than 2 or 3 or 4 days, you'll be addicted, and then when you try to go off of them, you'll go into withdrawal, which consists of intense anxiety and insomnia, the very problems that you took them for in the first place. But if we had a safe and great pill for anxiety or for depression, if we had a true antidepressant, which we don't have, but if we did, I'd be all for it. I've never been against treating anything with pills. I'm taking some pills for my back pain that comes up when I go out walking, and they are helping. So I've never been against medications. It's just that the medications for anxiety are very short term, and if you take them on a long-term basis, you're not going to recover from your anxiety. You're just going to develop a dependence on benzodiazepines. And in the depression area, the drugs called antidepressants really don't have much, if any, antidepressant effects above and beyond their placebo effects. But one day we may have pills for a lot of things that we don't today. And, I'll be the first to applaud them and to use them.
Those pills would seem to have to do something at a mechanistic level that is a little troublesome to me, which is they would have to change the way we think.
Yeah, that's right. You cannot change anxiety or any negative emotion without changing the way you think. It's physiologically impossible.
Right.
Thank God. I wouldn't want that.
That's even how alcohol works and amphetamines. You get all kinds of positive thoughts, and then you feel great.
Right.
Okay, let's go to the next question. Could you please give a brief overview about exposure with response prevention for the treatment of obsessive compulsive disorder?
I'll let you guys go first, but first of all, these are not treatments for anything, exposure and response prevention. They're tools in the treatment for anxiety or OCD, but they're not complete treatments, and that's a huge distinction. And we use 4 models, the motivational model, the cognitive model, the hidden emotion model, and the exposure and response prevention models. And so we'll talk about those tools, but I want to be very clear that if those are the only tools in your toolbox, your effectiveness in the treatment of OCD or any anxiety disorder will be very limited.
I agree with that, David. And also there's a process to the approach where you wouldn't just jump in doing exposure with response prevention to help someone overcome OCD. That you'd begin with careful testing, empathy, listening, understanding what their experience has been like, and then setting an agenda very carefully to identify what are some reasons they might want to keep this set of thoughts and behaviors, and
right.
And then the idea would be they'd have to convince me that they wanted to make some kind of change in their life rather than me throwing help at them.
Yeah. I can give an example of that if you want.
Love that.
Yeah.
A young woman was, I'll just disguise things a little bit, just say admitted to our hospital in Philadelphia with severe OCD. And she was afraid of sharp knives or anything sharp because she had the fear if she had a fork or table, something to cut at the dinner table, that she would take it and stab her mother to death. And so exposure, and so she was avoiding sharp objects. She'd gotten totally consumed by this so much that she had to be hospitalized. And she, exposure is exposing the patient to what they're afraid of. So if you're afraid of heights, you are exposed to heights. If you're afraid of cats, you interact with cats until the anxiety goes away. And so that's the exposure part of OCD treatment. If you're, afraid of something, you confront the fear rather than running away from it. And response prevention is just the rituals that OCD patients get into to relieve themselves of their fears. Like a woman would get very anxious when driving past Catholic churches or something like that. She'd be having a panic attack, and then she'd have to recite certain Hail Marys or something, or count backwards or forwards, some ritual she did to try to make her anxiety go away. And again, this thing had consumed her life. But to look at it when what you're saying from Matt, from the motivational point of view, you can't just see for exposure. She would have to be around sharp objects. The woman in the hospital, right? This young lady, and she'd have to be able to force her to pick them up and touch them, and rather than to avoid them. And she'd have to have her mother come in and sit down with her while she picks up these knives in her hands. And so exposure, you see, that's exposure and response prevention. We're exposing her to her fear and make her, like you're not allowed to, avoid sharp objects. And here's why that treatment, while it's the correct treatment, won't work. If you look at her as a human being, her brother sadly had been diagnosed with severe schizophrenia. One should get to talk to her, what's going on in your life. And he was younger, and he had a kind of schizophrenia that the doctors were telling the family, he will never function normally, and he'll have to be in some kind of protected situation for the rest of his life. And so the parents were telling this daughter, the one who developed OCD, when you get older, you're and when we're gone, you're going to have to take care of him. And now, what's the connection between that and her OCD, Matt?
My guess would be she's angry at being told that she has to live her life taking care of her brother, and at some level, the fantasies of stabbing her mother are an expression of anger.
Yeah, exactly. And she doesn't want to be burdened with her brother who she loves, but she wants to have sex. She wants to go party, and she wants to be a teenager and have fun. And she doesn't want to be constantly told that, you've got this burden around your neck for the rest of your life. And so part of the treatment is going to be, if you want me to treat you, not only will you have to sit here with knives in front of your mom, but you're going to have to tell her about your feelings. That's the whole hidden emotion model, and how you feel, rather than avoiding that. And that's taking a look at the whole person rather than just mechanistically treating them with some formula or some technique. And one of the things that bothers me about the whole mental health field is people are looking for simple formulas that they can apply, throw at patients, rather than treating patients as human beings. And in my experience, you can get some good results just by throwing techniques at people with so-called diagnoses, but you get vastly superior results by treating them as human beings and having a wide range of models for understanding them, as well as tools for helping them.
I love that story, David, because I think it illustrates too that in Team CBT, we're not just following, like you said, having and this is a criticism of like sort of traditional CBT. We don't just have a model, or we have a target behavior and we do things, or target symptom that we do things to eliminate, but we're providing a lot of empathy to our patient. And I imagine when you're following the TEAM with this particular patient, you had to have had a lot of empathy with her to understand where she came from, to understand that that experience with her mother was influencing her symptoms.
Yeah. Yeah. And the nice thing about that is then she doesn't view herself as a crazy person, right, who got these weird symptoms, but as a human being with real feelings that need to be expressed and deserve to be expressed, so that in recovering from any form of anxiety, including obsessive compulsive disorder, it's learning to be more of a full and complete human being, that you have a right to your feelings, and you have your right to your anger, a right to feel the way you do. And it's such a great thing that when you suddenly realize it's okay to have those feelings and to share them, your anxiety suddenly disappears. And that's such a beautiful and meaningful model. That rather than, why am I so weird with OCD and needing to be put in a hospital.
And would you say, David, most people who struggle with OCD do have some element of the hidden emotion?
I would say a good 75%.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very, very common, and it makes the treatment so much more wonderful, really.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Great. Matt, do you have anything you want to add?
I'm wondering if people understand exposure and response prevention, what it is, what we're talking about, how it works.
Well, give a quick overview of it again, so that people will know what we're talking about.
Yeah, so common type form of OCD is the contamination type, where you're afraid that you're going to contract some illness, and then so you might engage in like excessive hand washing, and people will come in and their hands will be bloody from just how often they're using scalding hot water to wash their hands and that kind of thing. The issue is that they feel safer once they do the hand washing, so they get a bit of relief from their anxiety when they do that. They think, oh, good, now I won't get sick, or something like that. And it seems like that sense of relief then reinforces the anxiety. It makes them think, oh, I'm only healthy today because I've been washing my hands so frequently. And so part of the cure is to just not respond in that way, by do a certain amount of hand washing, but only under certain circumstances. And And that's really hard for people to do because it will increase their anxiety. Their anxiety will go up first before it starts to go down. But if that's paired also with exposure of, playing, getting your hands dirty, and that's when people get the real relief. Combining those two methods can be quite profound because it just proves that they're not actually protecting themselves with this behavior, that they've got a functional immune system that's been doing that for them without their having to wash their hands so frequently. And so that's another part of the cure.
Yeah, and then the motivational part would be, I have no doubt that if we work together, we can cure your OCD. But there's a big if, and that's, are you willing to do what will be required? Because not only would you have to do, the response prevention, but actual exposure. So I might ask you not to take a bath for several days. I might ask you to put your hands in dirt and not wash them. I stumbled across that. I didn't know it was an established treatment when I was doing my research at the VA when I was a postdoctoral fellow, and I was supposed to be studying brain serotonin because we all had this wrong belief that serotonin deficiency caused depression. That was the chemical imbalance theory that finally people have accepted as rubbish. But we could kind of see that way back in the 1970s that the theory wasn't valid, and all the serotonin drugs that were being developed, that they were called antidepressants, really weren't having antidepressant effects. But I was trying to make a veteran super anxious to see, because that stimulates something about serotonin would stimulate prolactin release in the bloodstream, and so I needed a veteran to volunteer to become super anxious while I was taking repeated blood samples to see if there was this increase in serum prolactin levels, because that would indicate some kind of activity of the brain, serotonin activity in the hypothalamus or something like that made pretty good sense. And there was a veteran who had a contamination phobia like what you're talking about, and I asked him if he'd volunteer for this experiment. And in the experiment, I said I would make him see. He was afraid of gooey things, and he was washing his hands all day long. And I said, I put you in a bed here in our research ward, and then I'd put an indwelling catheter in your arm, and then I'd have you be real peaceful for 30 minutes. I'd kind of hypnotize you and tell you you're relaxed and peaceful. And then after that, I'm going to wrap your hands in towels covered with gooey, horrible junk that I got from outside, from the gardens, and, mulch and poured honey in there. Just the things that you're the most afraid of. And I'm going to wrap them around your hands and tape them so you can't get them off. And try to talk you into being as anxious as possible while I keep taking blood tests to see if your serum prolactin goes up. It'll be, and so he courageously volunteered for this. And he just totally freaked when I put the towels around his hands. And he says, please, I've got to get them off. I can't stand this. It's horrible. And I said, how anxious are you? And he said, 100 out of 100. And I said, well, just try it for 5 more minutes. I need to get one more blood sample. And I kept egging him on. And he finally, he'd had his hands in there for about 45 minutes or an hour or something. And I kept getting blood samples. I mean, he was a beautiful person to have the courage to do that, but that's called exposure and response prevention. And then after about an hour, he said, I've got some bad news for you, doctor. And I said, well, what's that? He says, I apologize, but my anxiety disappeared completely just now. You can, I'll leave them in all day if you want. I'm not afraid of contamination anymore. and he was cured. And that wasn't the purpose of it. I was just trying to get these biological blood samples, but that was the first time I'd ever heard of exposure or response prevention or being therapeutic. But that's the nubbin of how it works.
Wow, that is a really interesting story.
It was mind blowing. And then the thing about it is we sent them off. I was so excited to get the blood sample, see what happened with the serum prolactin levels. It was going to be my first research paper, and the samples were lost in the mail.
Mm.
Oh no!
So
but he was cured.
But he was cured, so it was a good deal after all.
I'm kind of curious, what would have happened, do you think, if when he said, I can't have my hands wrapped up here, I have to take them out, and you said, oh gosh, okay, yeah, oh gosh, take your hands out?
Yeah, well, then it would have just intensified his illness. But ethically, you have to be ethical. I told him, well, I will not force you to, if you want to take them off, you can. But please, if I could just get you to leave them on there for a while longer. And if I had known it was therapeutic, I mean, when I'm doing it for therapy, I say, are you willing to do this? It will be uncomfortable, but this is the type of thing you're going to have to do if you'd like to be cured. And I'll be there with you every step of the way, but it'll be very anxiety provoking at first. And I know that's awfully uncomfortable. And if I agree to work with you, would you be willing to do this type of thing? And that's the motivational model that we use up front with every OCD patient to see, I never try to persuade somebody to do something. I just say, if you want to work with me, this is what you're going to have to do. And I can also tell you that the odds are overwhelming, that if you're willing to do this, recovery will be not far away. But
I love that story. And Rhonda, I think your question was really important, that if you stop the exposure in sort of midstream, it can reinforce the anxiety. And so I do like to have that type of conversation, David, about a commitment to following through.
Yeah, that's right.
With the treatment for either a pre-designated number of minutes or until complete recovery has occurred.
Yeah.
So that we're not stopping in a way that would be an avoidance behavior.
Yeah, that's right.
Reinforce the anxiety.
Yeah, because if you run away from it, it gets stronger.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the clock on the wall says we're pretty close to the end here. Any closing comments? And there'll be tons more questions. I'll read just a few of them. So to whet your appetite, here's one. What questions can I ask to overcome the cognitive distortion called jumping to conclusions? That's the toughest one for me. That was someone's question. When you're working with clients, how do you handle it when they challenge their thoughts very convincingly using a variety of techniques? And they say they can see the logic in the restructured thought, but they are still experiencing heightened anxiety and state that it hasn't helped them. We dealt with that really already, but I have another answer to it here you'll be able to read. And then there's just tons of really neat questions here. So make sure you pick up on the show notes for this episode. Any wisdom closing thoughts from Rhonda and Matt?
I just think it's really a pleasure to be here with the two of you. You have such, brilliant minds, and it's really fun to just be here and sort of hear what it is that you have to say, even spontaneously, to these questions. Yeah.
Well, I agree with that. I agree with that, and I think that I love hearing both of you what you have to say. And Matt, your brilliant mind blows me away every time. But another treat for me is just hanging out with the two of you. I love you both so much, and to me, this is not only pleasurable, but it's just I feel grateful to be able to do this kind of thing and to have all of you listeners to listen and care about what we're saying. We're always trying to bring the best that we have to you, but we're honored that so many of you are listening. Just 2 days ago, we had part 1 on the rejection practice. By now we've had, by the time this one comes out, you can hear both of them, that was this handsome young man, Cody, who has intense social anxiety since he was a little boy, and it was a very moving episode. And I don't know what the listening is going to be to the part 2, the closure, which is in a few days, next Monday. But that was our biggest one-day download so far that I can remember. I think I told you, Ron, it went up over 11,000 downloads.
Right, that's what you said.
In one day. So you folks are really really helping us out. And if you know people with anxiety or depression who might benefit from, or you have a mailing list or something, the podcast, Feeling Good podcast, are totally free. And a lot of people have reported they have been helped by the podcast. So thank you so much for supporting us. I'll give you the last word, Matt.
Well, I wanted to thank both of you for your time and being present here today. I just enjoy your company so much, and I always learn a lot. We're doing these, so I hope to be able to join you again soon.
And Matt, do you still have openings in your practice ever, in case we have people, or you, Rhonda, as well, who are hearing these things and wanting some?
I do actually right now.
Some one-to-one help.
Yeah. Send folks my way. Sounds good.
Yeah, me too. Cool.
Okay. Well, there you go. So if you're wanting some expert help, you know where to go. So thank you, everybody, and have a great one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This has been another episode of the Feeling Good podcast. For more information, visit Dr. Burns' website at feelinggood.com, where you will find the show notes under the podcast page. You will also find archives of previous episodes and many resources for therapists and non-therapists. We welcome your comments and questions. If you want to support the show, please share the podcast with people who might benefit from it. You could also go to iTunes and leave a 5-star rating. I am your host, Rhonda Borowski, the director of the Feeling Great Therapy Center. We hope you enjoyed this episode. I invite you to join us next time for another episode of the Feeling Good podcast.